Kayden stood frozen in the dim hallway outside room 407. His hand hovered inches from the door. Behind it, he heard her voice. Clara, his bride. And then another voice. A man's voice. Low, familiar, urgent. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. In 15 minutes, they were supposed to walk into their rehearsal dinner together. In 24 hours, she was supposed to become his wife. But right now, standing in this hallway, Kayden felt the ground crack open beneath him. What he saw when he opened that door would change everything. Not just the wedding, not just their relationship, but his entire understanding of trust, love, and the woman he thought he knew. This is the story of what happened in room 407 on the night before a wedding that almost never happened. A story about secrets, shadows, and the thin line between betrayal and protection. Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? New York, Canada, maybe South Africa or Jamaica. We want to know. There are moments in life that divide time into before and after. Kayden was about to experience one of those moments, but to understand what happened in that hotel room, you need to understand how he got there. You need to know who Clara was, who Julian was, and why, on what should have been the happiest weekend of his life, Kayden found himself standing in a hallway questioning everything. Why was Clara locked in a hotel room minutes before their rehearsal dinner? Who was the man inside with her? Why did Kayden feel in his gut that something was terribly wrong? And what happened after he opened the door? These are the questions that will unravel a story far more complicated than it first appears. Kayden Henderson was not the kind of man who lived in drama. At 32, he was steady, reliable, the person his friends called when they needed help moving furniture or advice on buying a car. He worked as a civil engineer, loved hiking on weekends, and had a laugh that made people feel comfortable. He was the kind of person who showed up early, remembered birthdays, and never forgot to text back. When he met Clara Patterson 2 years earlier at a mutual friend's barbecue, he knew almost immediately she was different. Clara had this way of lighting up a room without trying. She was a high school art teacher, and she spoke about her students with such genuine affection that you couldn't help but smile. She was beautiful, yes, with dark curly hair and hazel eyes that seemed to change color depending on the light. But more than that, she was warm, real. She laughed at his terrible jokes and challenged him when he was being too logical about things that required heart. Their relationship grew naturally, comfortably, like two puzzle pieces that had been waiting to find each other. After a year and a half, Kayden proposed on a weekend trip to the mountains, at sunrise, on the ridge of a trail they'd hiked together a dozen times. Clara cried, nodded, and whispered yes before he even finished asking. Planning the wedding had been mostly joyful. They'd chosen a small venue, a historic inn with gardens and a view of the valley. They'd kept the guest list intimate, just close family and friends. Clara had designed their invitations herself, watercolor florals with gold lettering. Everything felt right, except for one shadow that occasionally flickered across Clara's face when she thought Kayden wasn't looking. Her past. Clara had been in a serious relationship before Kayden. His name was Julian. They dated for almost 3 years, from college into their mid-20s. Julian was charming, ambitious, a little reckless. He worked in finance, traveled constantly, and had a way of making Clara feel like she was the most fascinating person in the world one moment and completely invisible the next. Their relationship had been intense, exhausting, full of highs and lows that left Clara drained. When it ended badly. Julian had cheated. Clara found out through a text message he'd meant to delete. She broke it off immediately, moved out of their shared apartment, and spent months rebuilding herself. By the time she met Kayden, she'd done the work to heal, or so she thought. Kayden knew about Julian. Clara had been honest about her past, about the heartbreak, about how long it took her to trust again. Kayden never felt threatened by it. He wasn't the jealous type. He believed that the past was the past, and what mattered was the present they were building together. But what Kayden didn't know was that 2 weeks before the wedding, Julian had reached out to Clara. It started with a single email. Subject line, "I'm sorry." Clara almost deleted it without reading. but curiosity, or maybe some unresolved part of her heart, made her open it. Julian wrote that he'd been thinking about her, that he regretted how things ended, that he wanted closure. Not to get back together, just to talk, to apologize properly, to let go of the guilt he'd been carrying. Clara didn't respond. She told herself it didn't matter. The wedding was 2 weeks away. Julian was in the past. She was marrying Kayden, a man who loved her without conditions, without chaos. But Julian didn't stop. He sent another email, then a text, then he called. Each message was calm, respectful, but persistent. He said he'd be in town for work the weekend of her wedding. He asked if they could meet just for 20 minutes, so he could say what he needed to say and give her the closure she deserved. Clara still didn't tell Kayden. She told herself it was because there was nothing to tell. Julian was just a ghost trying to make peace. She could handle it. She didn't need to worry Kayden with something so small, so irrelevant. But deep down, a part of her knew she was hiding it because she wasn't sure how she'd feel when she saw Julian again. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for 6 o'clock on Friday evening. The wedding party had arrived that morning and checked into the Elmwood Inn, a beautiful old hotel with high ceilings, chandeliers, and rooms that smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. Kayden's parents were in room 302. Clara's mother and sister were in 318. Kayden and Clara had separate rooms for the night, a tradition Clara's mother insisted on. Kayden was in 501, Clara was in 407. The plan was simple. Everyone would gather in the garden at 6 for cocktails and appetizers, then move into the dining room for dinner. Toasts, laughter, stories, a celebration of the life Kayden and Clara were about to start. By 5:30, Kayden was dressed and ready. He wore a navy blazer, white shirt, no tie, casual but sharp. He texted Clara, "Ready when you are. Can't wait to see you." 3 minutes passed. No response. Kayden smiled to himself. Clara was probably still getting ready, fussing over her hair or her dress. He walked downstairs to the garden where a few guests were already mingling. His best man, David, clapped him on the shoulder and handed him a beer. They talked about the ceremony, about the weather, about how surreal it felt that this was actually happening. But as the minutes ticked by, Kayden found himself glancing toward the hotel entrance. 6 o'clock came. Clara still hadn't come down. Kayden checked his phone. No new messages. He texted again. "Everything okay?" Another 5 minutes. No response. Kayden's mother noticed his distraction. She walked over and gently touched his arm. "Is Clara coming?" she asked. Kayden forced a smile. "Yeah, she's just running a little late." But something felt off. Clara was never late. She was the person who set alarms 15 minutes early just to be safe. Kayden excused himself and walked back into the hotel. He took the elevator to the 4th floor, his mind trying to rationalize. Maybe she'd fallen asleep. Maybe her phone died. Maybe she was having a wardrobe crisis and lost track of time. He walked down the carpeted hallway to room 407 and knocked softly. "Clara? You in there?" Silence. He knocked again, a little louder. "Babe, everyone's waiting. You okay?" Then he heard it. A voice, muffled but unmistakable. Clara's voice. And then another voice. A man's voice. Kayden's stomach dropped. He pressed his ear closer to the door. The man's voice was low, urgent. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was familiar. Too familiar. Kayden's hand went to the doorknob. He tested it, unlocked. His heart hammered in his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to stop, to walk away, to trust her. But his hand was already turning the knob. If this story has your heart racing, comment, "I'm still watching." Let's see who's following the story to the end. The door swung open. The room was dimly lit, curtains half drawn. Clara stood near the window, her back to the door. She was wearing the soft pink dress she'd chosen for the rehearsal dinner. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest. In and standing less than 3 feet away from her, facing her, was Julian Cross. Time seemed to freeze. Clara spun around, her face going pale. Julian's expression shifted from surprise to guilt in an instant. Kayden stood in the doorway, his hand still on the knob, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was suffocating. Then Clara's voice broke through. shaky and desperate. Kayden, this isn't what it looks like. Those words, the exact words Kayden had heard in 100 movies, 1,000 stories, the words that always meant the exact opposite. Julian took a step back, raising his hand slightly as if to show he wasn't a threat. Kayden, man, I swear to you, nothing happened. I just needed to talk to her. Kayden's eyes moved between them. Clara's face was flushed, her eyes wide with panic. Julian looked uncomfortable, guilty, but not defensive. There was no physical contact, no embrace, no kiss. Just two people standing in a hotel room, alone, minutes before a rehearsal dinner. But the intimacy of it, the secrecy, the fact that Clara hadn't told him Julian would be here, felt like a knife twisting in his chest. Kayden's voice came out quieter than he expected. How long has he been here? Clara's hands trembled. Kayden, please, let me explain. How long, Clara? He just showed up. I swear, 10 minutes ago. I didn't know he was coming. I didn't invite him. Julian spoke up, his voice steady but strained. I messaged her. I told her I wanted to talk. She didn't respond. I shouldn't have come. I know that now. But I needed to say something before tomorrow. I needed closure. Kayden's jaw tightened. Closure? He looked at Clara. And you thought the night before our wedding was the time to give him that? Clara's eyes filled with tears. I didn't think he'd actually show up. When he knocked on my door, I panicked. I didn't want to make a scene. I thought I could just hear him out and get him to leave before anyone noticed. Kayden felt something inside him crack. Not anger, not rage. Something worse. Disappointment. Betrayal wrapped in the realization that the woman he trusted more than anyone had kept this from him. He took a step back into the hallway. Kayden, wait. Clara moved toward him, but he held up a hand. I need a minute. He turned and walked down the hallway, his mind spinning, his chest tight. Behind him, he heard Clara's voice, broken and pleading. Kayden, please. But he didn't stop. Kayden didn't go back to the garden. He couldn't face the guests, the smiles, the toasts. He went to his room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. His hands were shaking. He stared at the floor, replaying the scene over and over. Clara and Julian, alone, in her room, minutes before their rehearsal dinner. She said nothing happened. Julian said nothing happened. But why hadn't she told him Julian was reaching out? Why did she hide it? Why did she let him into her room? Kayden wanted to believe her. Every fiber of his being wanted to believe that this was just a misunderstanding, a moment of poor judgment, not a betrayal. But trust, once cracked, doesn't seal itself back together easily. There was a soft knock on his door. Kayden? Clara's voice. He didn't answer. She knocked again. Please, let me in. Let me explain. Kayden stood, walked to the door and opened it. Clara stood in the hallway, tears streaming down her face. She looked small, scared, devastated. I'm so sorry, she whispered. Kayden stepped aside, letting her in. She walked to the center of the room and turned to face him. Her voice trembled as she spoke. Julian started reaching out 2 weeks ago. He said he wanted closure. I didn't respond at first. I thought if I ignored him, he'd stop. But he kept messaging. He said he'd be in town this weekend. He asked if we could meet. I said no. I told him I was getting married and that chapter of my life was closed. But he showed up anyway. He knocked on my door 20 minutes ago. I opened it because I thought if I just let him say what he needed to say, he'd leave and it would be over. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry. I didn't think it mattered. But I see now how wrong that was. I should have told you. I should have been honest. Kayden listened, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. What did he want to say? Clara hesitated. He said he regretted how things ended, that he never apologized properly, that he wanted me to know he was sorry. Kayden's voice was flat. And what did you say? I told him I forgave him, that I'd moved on, that I was happy, that tomorrow I'm marrying the love of my life. Her voice cracked on the last words. Kayden looked at her, searching her face for any trace of doubt, of hesitation. He found none, just fear, fear of losing him. He exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest loosening just slightly. "You should have told me." "I know. You should have trusted me enough to handle it." "I know." They stood in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. Kayden's mind was still racing, but his heart was starting to catch up. He believed her. He didn't want to. Part of him wanted to be angry, to hold on to the hurt, but he believed her. Kayden rubbed his face with both hands, exhausted. "What else did he say, Clara? There has to be more. People don't just show up unannounced the night before someone's wedding for closure." Clara bit her lip, hesitating. Kayden's eyes narrowed. "Clara." She took a shaky breath. "He said he came to warn me." Kayden's stomach tightened. "Warn you? About what?" Clara's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "He said someone at the wedding is trying to sabotage it." The room went silent. Kayden stared at her, trying to process what she just said. "What are you talking about?" Clara sat down on the edge of the bed, wringing her hands. "Julian said he ran into someone a few weeks ago, someone from my past, someone who's still angry with me. He said this person found out about the wedding and has been planning something. He didn't have all the details, but he felt like he had to tell me." Kayden felt his pulse quicken. "Who? Who's trying to sabotage our wedding?" Clara looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. "He didn't want to say over text. That's why he came here. He said he needed to tell me in person because he wasn't sure who to trust." Kayden paced the room, his mind racing. This was insane. It sounded like something out of a movie. But Julian's face in that hotel room hadn't looked smug or manipulative. It had looked worried, genuinely worried. "Did he say who it was?" Kayden asked. Clara shook her head. "He said he thought it was someone from your side, someone in your family." Kayden stopped pacing. "My family? That's ridiculous. My family loves you." "I know," Clara said quickly. "That's what I told him. But he said this person has been asking questions, digging into my past, trying to find dirt. He said he overheard them on the phone talking about ruining the wedding." Kayden felt a cold chill run down his spine. He thought about his family, his parents, his sister, his aunts and uncles. They'd all been nothing but supportive. His mother adored Clara. His sister had helped plan half the wedding. Who could possibly want to sabotage this? Then a thought hit him. His cousin, Rebecca. Rebecca had always been competitive, always compared herself to Michael. When he got into college, she made snide comments. When he got his engineering job, she downplayed it. When he got engaged, she'd made a strange comment at the announcement dinner. Something like, "Well, let's hope it lasts longer than your last relationship." Kayden had brushed it off at the time. Rebecca was just like that. A little bitter, a little jealous, but harmless. Right? Kayden pulled out his phone and opened his messages. He scrolled to Rebecca's name. Their last conversation was from 3 days ago. She'd asked about the rehearsal dinner schedule. Nothing strange. But then Kayden noticed something. A message from 2 weeks ago. Rebecca had asked casually if Clara's ex-boyfriend would be at the wedding. Kayden had thought it was a weird question at the time, but he'd answered honestly. "No, he's not invited." "Why?" Rebecca had replied. "Just curious. Wanted to make sure there wouldn't be any drama." Kayden's jaw clenched. He showed Clara the message. Her face went pale. "You think it's her?" Kayden didn't answer. He was already texting David, his best man. "Need you to do me a favor, discreetly. Keep an eye on Rebecca tonight. Let me know if she does anything weird." David responded almost immediately. "Weird how?" "Just trust me." Kayden pocketed his phone and looked at Clara. "We're going down to that dinner. We're going to act like everything's fine, and we're going to figure out what the hell is going on." Clara nodded, wiping her eyes. "What about Julian?" Kayden's voice was firm. "He needs to leave. Now." Clara nodded again. "I'll tell him." They walked back down to room 407 together. Julian was still there, standing awkwardly by the window. When he saw Kayden, he straightened up, clearly bracing for a confrontation. But Kayden's voice was calm, measured. "If what you're saying is true, then thank you for the warning. But you need to leave. Now." Julian nodded. "I understand. I'm sorry for the timing. I just didn't know what else to do." Kayden held his gaze. "Do me one more favor. Tell me exactly who you overheard and what they said. Julian hesitated, then pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his notes and turned the screen toward Kayden. There, in typed text, was a conversation Julian claimed he'd overheard at a coffee shop 2 weeks ago. A woman's voice, talking on the phone, laughing about how she'd found some old photos of Clara from college. Photos that could raise some questions if they surfaced at the right time. Photos involving a party, some drinking, some bad judgment. Nothing illegal, nothing immoral, but enough to be embarrassing, enough to create doubt. And the woman had mentioned a name. Kayden's name. Julian looked at Kayden seriously. I didn't hear the whole conversation, but I heard enough to know it wasn't innocent. And when I saw the number she called, I recognized the area code. Same area code as your hometown? Kayden's blood ran cold. Rebecca. It had to be. She was the only person from his hometown who'd ever shown any hostility toward Clara. Kayden and Clara walked into the rehearsal dinner together, hand in hand. To everyone else, they looked like a happy couple, glowing and ready for their big day. But inside, they were on high alert. Kayden scanned the room. His parents were laughing with Clara's mom. His sister was chatting with some cousins. And there near the back, nursing a glass of wine and scrolling through her phone, was Rebecca. Kayden leaned toward David. Did you notice anything? David shook his head. Not yet, but I've been watching. She's been on her phone a lot. Kayden nodded. Keep watching. The dinner progressed. Toasts were made. Kayden's father gave a heartfelt speech about love and commitment. Clara's mother cried happy tears. Everything seemed normal, perfect even. But then during dessert, Rebecca stood up. She tapped her glass with a fork, drawing everyone's attention. Kayden's stomach dropped. I'd like to say a few words, Rebecca announced, smiling sweetly. The room quieted. Clara's hand tightened around Kayden's under the table. Rebecca cleared her throat. I've known Kayden my whole life. We grew up together, and I've seen him go through a lot. Relationships, heartbreaks, lessons learned. She paused, her eyes flicking toward Clara. And when he told me he was getting married, I was thrilled. Really, because Clara seems like a wonderful person. The word seems hung in the air like a threat. Rebecca pulled out her phone. But I believe in being honest. And I think before two people commit to spending their lives together, they should know everything about each other, don't you? Kayden stood up. Rebecca, don't. Rebecca's smile widened. I'm just saying, if I were getting married, I'd want to know if my partner had any skeletons in their closet, wouldn't you? Clara's face flushed. The room was silent, everyone sensing the tension but not understanding it. Kayden's voice was firm, commanding. Rebecca, sit down. Now. But Rebecca held up her phone. I have some photos here, from Clara's college days. Nothing scandalous, really. Just some fun times. But I thought everyone might like to see them before tomorrow. You know, for context. Before she could show the screen, David stepped forward and gently but firmly took the phone from her hand. I think you've had enough wine, Rebecca. Rebecca's face twisted in anger. Give that back. No, David said calmly. Kayden walked over to Rebecca, his voice low and controlled. This ends now. I don't know what your problem is, but you're not going to ruin this wedding. You're not going to hurt Clara. And if you ever try something like this again, you're not welcome in my life. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, not sad tears, angry tears. You don't even see it, do you? She's not good enough for you. Michael, she's hiding things. She's not who you think she is. Kayden leaned in close. The only person hiding something here is you. And whatever bitterness or jealousy you're carrying, it's yours to deal with, not ours. He turned to his parents. Mom, Dad, I think Rebecca needs to leave. His father, a man of few words but strong presence, stood up immediately. Rebecca, outside. Now. Rebecca looked around the room, realizing she'd lost. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, her father following close behind. The room slowly returned to normal. Guests whispered, confused, but the tension began to lift. Kayden sat back down next to Clara. She was trembling. He took her hand and squeezed it. It's over, he whispered. Clara looked at him, tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry. I never wanted any of this. Kayden shook his head. None of this is your fault. None of it. Later that night, after the dinner ended and the guests had gone to their rooms, Kayden and Clara stood together on the hotel balcony. The night air was cool, the stars bright above them. Clara leaned her head on Kayden's shoulder. "Do you still want to marry me tomorrow?" she asked quietly. Kayden turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands. "Clara, the only thing that would stop me from marrying you tomorrow is if you didn't show up." She smiled through her tears. "I'll be there." "I know," Kayden said, "and so will I." They stood there in the quiet, holding each other, understanding that trust wasn't about never being tested. It was about choosing each other even when things got hard. The next day, Clara walked down the aisle in a dress that took Kayden's breath away. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, the room stayed silent. Rebecca wasn't there. She checked out of the hotel that morning, and when Kayden and Clara exchanged vows, they did so knowing that their love had already survived its first real test. Not because there was no conflict, but because when conflict came, they faced it together. So what would you have done if you were Kayden? Would you have opened that door? Would you have believed Clara when she explained what happened? Or would the doubt have been too much? And what about Clara? Do you think she was wrong for not telling Kayden about Julian's messages? Or do you understand why she thought she could handle it on her own? Here's the real question. Is it possible to rebuild trust after a moment like that? Can a relationship survive when secrets, even small ones, threaten to unravel everything? Think about your own life. Think about the people you love. Have you ever kept something from them because you thought you were protecting them? Or have you ever been on the other side, discovering something that made you question everything? Kayden and Clara's story reminds us that love isn't just about the good times. It's about what happens when things fall apart. It's about whether you run away or stay and fight for each other. If you thought this story was intense, wait until you hear the next one. We've got another tale that will leave you speechless. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss it, and let us know in the comments, what would you have done in Michael's place? We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you watched till the end, comment, "Yes, I do," and thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next story.